The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Commito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.
Mike, it's another episode of the Unlikely Innovators. Really happy to be here once again. Today we have someone that we've known for quite some time, and those in the Canadian applied research ecosystem would be familiar with. That's, of course, Dr. Robert Luke. How did you think things went today?
It was a great chat. Obviously, we covered a variety of topics. College applied research, eCampus Ontario. You got to geek out a little bit on industrial design. There was part of the conversation that we weren't, that wasn't part of the chat that we recorded, where I think there could have been a whole food podcast. You gave us some great recommendations on places to grab a bite in Toronto. So Steve and I are now furiously trying to map out when we'll be there next to kind of take him up on some of these offers. But no, I think we were trying to tape an earlier intro, and Steve's, this is a bit of his Michael Jordan flu game.
Why would you bring this up?
He's not quite as sick as Michael Jordan was when he came back in that game against Utah, but he's not well today. And we tried an intro, but we ended up scrapping it. But again, I think what Steve was going at is, in one of our questions, we embarrassed Robert by referring to him as the godfather of the tech access network here in Canada.
You almost did it.
Yeah, but he obviously, I think, was part of a committee that brought that together, taking the CCT model in Quebec and right sizing it for what we have here in Ontario and the rest of Canada. But certainly, I think he'd been instrumental with that group in kind of leading the charge to make this happen. And again, kind of talked about running into him at, we didn't actually get to meet him formally in person at the TAC Innovate Forum, but we're there when he got his award, which I think was the first time he mentioned that he was at a loss for words. And so certainly not today. We covered a lot of ground, and I think there's a lot of great nuggets throughout this conversation.
Yeah, and I think one thing to point out for the listeners is if they do find Robert Luke on social media and they see his post from that evening, actually me and you were in the background of it because he took a selfie on the stage. So look for little old us in the background. That's a chance at greatness, perhaps. But anyway, we will leave it to Robert to discuss.
I think before we get there, though, that we know that a lot of our listeners, especially from the college and university ecosystem, are familiar with Dr. Robert Luke. But I think for those that are maybe joining this episode for the first time, I'll do a quick read of his bio, and then we'll see Steve is sick. He's not well. So we're just going to give him a pass today that he's just he's running afoul of our podcast etiquette because he's running a fever of 108. So he's near death. So Robert Luke is the Chief Executive Officer of eCampus Ontario, which provides leadership to Ontario's Indigenous institutes, universities, and colleges, promoting digital by design education, collaboration, and innovation. eCampus Ontario helps to inform and shape Ontario's post-secondary education system in consultation with sector stakeholders. Prior to his role at eCampus Ontario, Dr. Luke spent 10 years in executive management as Vice President, Research and Innovation at George Brown College and at OCAD University. His expertise is in human-centered knowledge, media design, working at the intersections of education and information science to produce useful and usable technology to support education, health, and innovation in systems. And so I think we got all of that today with Dr. Robert Luke. So I think, to Steve's point, let's just go right to Dr. Robert Luke.
I'm sure glad we don't read those in front of the guest anymore.
Here we go.
All right, Mike, we're back and we're joined by Robert Luke, who is the CEO of eCampus Ontario. Robert, we were having more fun before we hit record. We were talking about window washers and how you're in the big city when you have a window washer. Unfortunately, here in Sudbury, our windows are quite dirty as a result. No, but welcome to the show. We're really, really happy to have you. It's really gonna be a good time because it's one of those things where folks in the ecosystem have heard of Robert Luke for some time, and we just wanted to dive a bit deeper on where you've been, where you're going, and all points in between.
You're much too kind. I'm really pleased to be here and I feel like I've arrived. I've made it on your
Well, like this is not the apex, that's for sure. I mean, this could be a gateway into much more reputable programs, but hopefully this is just a stop on the way. Robert, when we sort of get started, we sort of ask the sort of, what did you want to be when you grow up? But we couldn't help in your bio notice that you're part of what we're now calling the Arts and Humanities Club as it relates to people who are working in technology. That's Mike and my background, and we noticed that of you too. You have a Master of Arts in English Language and Literature, Can you talk about how the humanities early on may have informed your career trajectory, if at all?
It's a great question and a really great place to start. I would be remiss if I didn't start with saying, and the end of our exploring is to arrive from where we started and know it for the first time. So there's a literary
Excellent.
reference for you. I think that's T.S. Eliot. I think the humanities help me understand how to read culture. And to me, that's really important. I eventually went on to a career in designing technology, and there's a direct through line with your ability to read simile and metaphor and your ability to read the context in which a given technology might be made useful and usable. So I think what the humanities did was help me understand that everything has a context and to read deeply into topic verticals, but also broadly into topic horizontals. So nowadays we call that the T-shaped graduate. But I think I learned a lot of those valuable skills and also about communication and, a lot of arcane information and knowledge from, doing various kinds of literary studies. But I would say literature taught me how to read and interpret signs of the past. Cultural studies, which I also studied, taught me how to read and interpret signs of the present, and both have informed my work in human-centered design, which is to write the future.
And I'm sure you knew you were going to do that when you were studying English literature, right?
I didn't actually. When I went to college in Vancouver to get a university transfer arts diploma. I had been turned down from the university that I had applied to. Actually, Simon Fraser University said I wasn't good enough to go there. They didn't say I wasn't good enough. I had been out of high school for 4 years, and even though I had graduated with an A average, the rejection letter, which obviously stung because I remember it, said the grades that you have in high school are no longer representative of the kind of learner you are today. And so they say, go and take a credit at a college, show us that you could be a good learner, and then think about applying to the university. Now, I did end up staying at the college, Douglas College in New Westminster, for 2 years. And because it was half the cost of the university, and the classes were very small, and it was just a really good learning community. It taught me a lot about the value of credit transfer, which always stuck with me. But I think what the humanities gave me was an inroad or a gateway into higher education. Because I thought at the time that I wanted to be a teacher, and I wasn't quite sure, what I could or would teach. And so that was kind of my route. And I always liked reading and words and language, so it seemed like a natural thing. By the way, fast forward to 2014, I was invited to Simon Fraser University to participate in a conference and give a talk. And they introduced me, and I said, "Hey, thanks a lot for inviting me here, because in 1991, I applied to come here and you told me I wasn't good enough. So I'm pretty appreciative of the fact that you brought me back so many years later."
Yeah, it's like Michael Jordan getting cut by his junior basketball team, right? And then coming back and stuffing in their face.
I don't think I'm quite Michael Jordan, but
Yeah, as it was coming out of my mouth, it was a bit hyperbolic, but we'll roll with it.
Hyperbole is good. Like,
Yeah.
let's leave verisimilitude to the.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve and I are no strangers to hyperbole on this podcast, so we appreciate it. This is a bit of a full circle moment for me, Robert, because when I started in applied research, it was back in 2016. My first role was as an applied research developer, so working with the companies to try to broker these projects together. And admittedly, when I came to Cambrian, I didn't know about college applied research at all. Like, I was a product of the university research system. And I just never even considered that colleges, especially even one in my own backyard, were doing the type of work that we're doing now. And I remember my boss at the time, Emil, told me, "You've got to read this paper by Dr. Robert Luke. It's going to set you up. You're going to get a better idea of like what's going on." And so that paper we're obviously talking about is the one that you wrote, 2013. Talking about how we measure innovation skills acquired by college and polytechnic students. And now on reflecting upon that, like, we're more than 10 years removed from that paper. And I just can't help but think that paper, and at least I think the lens in which you went at it, is even more important now in 2024. than we are in 2013, because I think the system of college applied research has just evolved so much since then. Just wondering if maybe you can reflect back on, those findings in 2013 and maybe how, you would approach it now and the importance of college applied research to, to our workforce and to the economy today.
Thanks, Mike. I think it's interesting to reflect on things that you wrote a long time ago. That's one actually that probably stands the test of time, unlike some of the other things I have written. And it was less about, I don't think there was any measurement per se in it. It was more about, here's how we might want to think about designing college applied research, specifically around skills. And I had entered the college applied research world in 2007 and had a similar situation to you, where I wasn't quite aware of, I was quite aware of colleges. I had done some work with Centennial College to stand up their research capabilities, primarily in healthcare. Had been working as a university researcher, but more, I would say, because I was doing human-centered design, I was designing technology, so it was very, TRL 3-4 plus. And it's applied research, experimental development kind of work. But what I recognized in the colleges was that they were filling an important and essential gap in the idea to innovation pathway. And it's hard for me to comment on 2013 without knowing what I know in 2024. So, I can't really put myself in the mindset, except that I had read a really good OECD report, which I think was in maybe 2012, which was basically about innovation, skills, and productivity. And they had done a large environmental scan. Philip Toner, I think, was the author. It's well worth looking up. But they had done quite a large environmental scan, and they showed that most innovation that leads to productivity in an economy is incremental, not disruptive, is done by those with intermediate qualifications, and is done primarily like on the shop floor, if you will. So in actual work context. And that was a really kind of game-changing moment for me. Right around that time, actually a couple of years earlier, I had read the OECD's Frascati manual. Take that for what it is. There's also the Oslo manual, which is really interesting. The Oslo manual is about how we define innovation and innovation ecosystems. The Frascati manual is how OECD countries measure research. And that taught me about the differentiation between basic research, applied research, and experimental development. And because, maybe this is my humanities background, I love that kind of overarching narrative structure, but it allowed me to interpret the way the various actors who are doing research in the ecosystem, universities, colleges, businesses, are doing different and complementary roles. So the college applied research was filling this important gap, as I said, and it's not to take anything away from the world-leading universities and their capacity for basic research. But we do know from the 2018 horizontal review that Canada is the #1 investor in the G7, #4 in the OECD, I think at the time, in publicly funded research, and last in the G7 and 16 or so for business investment in R&D. And 78% of our public investment in R&D does not go past TRL2. So we kind of have Popeye research muscles. We're really good at one thing, but not at another, like at the larger continuum. And colleges are filling that gap. And understanding that continuum of research, I think, is key to understanding how we can enable the innovation economy. So where are different actors in the continuum going to be best placed? I mean, to use a sports analogy, I'm not that much of a sporty guy, but in basketball, if I think back to high school, like there's different positions and each plays their zone, and it strikes me. Let's talk about soccer, because I did actually play soccer, but like we're kind of playing innovation like 9-year-olds play soccer. We're all running over there to do something when we should be playing zone, which is what the rest of the world does. So colleges, I recognize, actually, properly speaking, it was called applied research, but really what we do in colleges is experimental development, if you really want to get technical about it. But I get it, applied research sounds better. It's easier to say and spell. It's a helpful metaphor, but there's that continuum, and colleges filled that gap which has been a big missing link in Canada. Really, really good at basic research. But, as I've said in other forums, we've been kind of the world's open source idea factory. We excel at basic research. We give that research away. We publish it. That's great. Science is good. And people make products. Other countries make products that we buy back. And we have, the last expert panel I was on was 2018, and we had a $2 billion a year IP deficit. And we can't afford that anymore. We need our companies to be innovating, and colleges and the work that you were providing are really that missing link in scaffolding between the basic research and the TRL 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and market entry that businesses are doing. And to bring this back to skills, I recognized that students are essential to the performance of any duty in any university, college, or Indigenous institute. And when we involve students at all stages of research, we're future-proofing our capacity to innovate across all sectors. And that paper in particular was looking at a couple of things. Number one, what are the types of activities that college applied research does? And what are the range of skills, innovation literacy, we could call it, that students acquire as they go through that? And how do we then ensure that students know what skills they acquire so that when they graduate and get into business, they're more likely to innovate themselves?
Yeah, and I think that's so important because, fast forward to now where we're even in our experience, because our students that we have that work at the center on these, company engaged projects, they don't have to look for jobs when they leave.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? They're the most employable among the student body. And I think, if it's not with the company they worked with, it's with one that has heard about their skills that are different from a regular graduate. Is that how you see it too?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And I think, if I take lesson number one, when I used to teach human-centered design, render tacit knowledge explicit. And what that means is it might be obvious to you, but it might not be obvious to somebody else. Marshall McLuhan said, I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish. And our students, when they go out of our fishbowl into the world, are in an important liminal state, and we need to equip them with these skills. We need to be explicit about what they have. I actually believe really strongly that if we just name the skills that learners acquire and tell them, I believe that this will be one of the easiest and fastest paths to improving productivity, for the simple fact that if you know that you have these skills, you will likely put them into practice more quickly. So let me ask you a question. When you graduated, did anybody ever tell you, here's the skills that you have?
Never.
Actually, so it's funny you say that, because actually I think, Steve, you'll rethink your answer, because Steve and I both had graduating from where? From university, or because like when Steve and I we both went to the same University of Laurentian. We both had a similar or same master's supervisor, Mark.
Oh, I know what you're going to say. Yeah,
and Mark was really good. He was really, I think, forthcoming with what skills I think he thought we were developing as historians. And I think early on, he always told us that, yes, you're going to graduate, with a degree and a master's in history, but like, you're not just that piece of paper, right? And he talked about like the skill sets we developed in communication and analytical thinking and all of these great things, which actually I think helped me kind of contextualize where could I go with this. Ultimately, I went on and did a PhD. And then at that point, when I realized job prospects were quite limited for somebody like me who wanted to stay in Sudbury with only one university in town, there's not a lot of jobs as a history professor. But with Mark kind of trying to show me exactly what skills I had learned, it then allowed me to, I think, about the world around me and the jobs that were available to me. And even though they weren't asking for somebody with a PhD in history or a master's in history, I knew that I could do that job based on what Mark had, I think, tried to coach us and show us, right? So I think he's a rare example of somebody who knew that it wasn't just that, like it was the journey that we'd went on that would equip us for our future work.
What I'll say, Mike, is I will edit myself. I took the question to mean, did the institution do that?
Oh,
I would say
yeah.
the institution didn't.
No.
That was more like you get you graduate and then you're on your own to sort of set your path. I think Mark Kuhlberg doing that was in response to the institution not doing it, right? Because he knew that not everyone was going to, like, graduating from the master's program is going to go on to become a history professor. So let's elucidate some of those skills so that they know how to market themselves. He was big on marketing oneself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so important. I'm really glad that you had that experience. Obviously, that is an anomalous experience because most students, unless you're in maybe a professional faculty or a trade, you're not graduating and being told what skills you have. And to me, that's one of the biggest gaps that we have. We have, I call it the 1221 problem. We've got a 12th century business model trying to operate in the 21st century. This is a failure of product market fit. We teach content, but learners and employers want competencies. And the competencies are assumed. And what's important here, there are tacit assumptions. So just simply rendering those explicit, obviously your supervisor did this for you and gave you a leg up in the labor market, which I think is a fantastic example for what is possible when we simply are being explicit about those tacit skills assumptions inherent in our programs. That should be our number one goal right now across the entire sector. I've had the opportunity to, engage with or interact with about 8,000 students in my career, including, as a teacher and as a running applied research. 7,562 of them were at George Brown, incidentally. Not one of those students ever came to me and said, I don't want a job. Right? Yeah. They all wanted to get a job and a career. And the best way that I saw that we could help them, so back to applied research, is say, you've gained these skills, right? You know product development, project management, communication, how to pitch your project, a little bit of finances, like all of those things. And the simple fact and act of saying you have these skills has helped those students be better innovators. And I would bet you the specialty coffee of your choice every day for a month, that if we could track down those students, they would probably say, more likely than not, that they had a faster route into their careers.
Robert, this has kind of changed my entire outlook on how we sell college to post-secondary grad or secondary school graduates, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I hadn't, like, I think we knew this. It sort of got jumbled into what the nebulous cloud called soft skills, but it's not soft skills. It's actually, and when you think about it, if you're not told that those are your skills, you don't have the confidence to write that on a resume or a cover letter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's yeah, I'm having a bit of a freak out right now. That's really good, actually.
You save your, cathartic moment for after we slow.
Yeah. What do you mean, dead air? Dead air of me having a pensive face is not good. Good entertainment.
He's gonna forget all the questions because he's thinking. I'm thinking about it too, just in terms of like our students that we have here, right? In terms of like some of the additional mentorship we can provide to them, because I think that is a good point where you see the things that they're doing and you watch them kind of evolve as they're here with us, and you see their tangible skills that they're doing in the shops and the labs, but it's all that other stuff but do we actually tell them that? Sometimes we do, but oftentimes we don't, right? And I think they need that extra push, right? So they do, to Steve's point, have that confidence to actually say like, no, I have been a part of, product development timeline and all these different projects, and I've had my chance to communicate with clients and
pitch work.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it's really important. Before I left George Brown, we started a badging program. I don't know if they still do it, but there was a collection of badges that we gave them, which was basically just, hey, you worked on a project, your prof says you've got these skills, here you go. And it was kind of important, I think, because it did do that explicit rendering of skills. But I just remember some students reaching out saying, hey, I didn't get my badge, where's my badge? I did the same project, I got those skills. And that to me was a win, right? Which was saying, okay, that student or students who contacted us recognized, maybe they had the frisson of FOMO that they wanted their badge for their LinkedIn profile as well. But they reached out specifically because they wanted to participate in demonstrating their proficiency, particularly as they were graduating.
Yeah. That's super important. That's when you have buy-in, right? To your point about product market fit, when the masses are looking for it, that's when you're onto something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to shift gears entirely, unfortunately. But this was a good tangent to be on, I think. This is a self-serving question, so you'll have to bear with me. I'm a huge fan and have been for some time, since a study that I was part of when I was doing some postgraduate work at a economic development organization that looked at sources of industrial design across Canada. and how that impacts the economy and the creative economy, what was called the creative economy at the time, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Robert.
Yeah.
I had a chance to meet with folks at OCAD at their site in Toronto and work collaboratively with some of the researchers. And industrial design, Mike, I've said this on the podcast before, is something that I just fanboy out on all the time. And in your bio, and most people know that you also worked. Was it the associate VP of research?
Vice President of Research and Innovation. Same thing.
Apologies, I demoted you unexpectedly.
VP research reigns but does not rule.
Very, very good. So, like, obviously, what a wicked campus. I mean, like, unreal. And I'll land the plane on a question for you to respond to rather than me just rambling. But could you talk about some of the research outputs of industrial design when you were there that really sort of wowed you? Because looking at like just all the things that those students were designing was just incredible. When you look at like the thin edge of the where the product is made, that is, to me, is so fascinating.
Yeah, well, where to begin?
Yeah,
was a fantastic experience, and had it not been for the pandemic, I probably would not have left. I would still be there because for me, it was a real, opportunity to come back and continue to support research, which I've been doing for 9 years, but also to, start to contemplate returning to teaching, basically, which was kind of what I was thinking of. So I'm a huge fan of design. I think, good design is important. I've been a practitioner of human-centered design, and, my mantra, besides rendering tacit knowledge explicit, is to make something useful and usable, and to also try to incite a frisson of joy. A couple of things I'll say before I talk about some examples, though. First is that one of the things I learned from reading the OCAD University book, here's our prospectus. It was like a footnote on page 16. OCAD U graduates work in every sector of the economy. And I said to the folks in the communication shop, I said, that's your headline.
mm-hmm.
Like, don't bury that on page 16 or whatever it was. The simple fact of the matter is that creative thinking is going to drive all aspects of the economy. The other thing I'll say is Canada, in addition to being slow off the mark on anything other than basic research, was also very slow off the mark on design. At the time when I went there, 2016, SSHRC funded 500 disciplines. The word design did not appear once. NSERC did fund engineering design, but it was mostly on like how you design engineering schemas, that kind of stuff. Things like industrial design or product design, you had to apply to the granting councils under artistic work, which is wrong, frankly. It's not, it is kind of artistic. Now, the Canada did update the Canada Research and Development Classification in 2020. We did some, at OCAD, we did some interventions because there was a panel underway at the time to update it. And what's important to understand there is, any company that has come out of Silicon Valley in the last 40 years has used design. And so we as a country, up until 2020, did not acknowledge that as an actually legitimate activity that would influence everything from product design through to policy or process design. So we're a little slow off the mark. And there was the Design Management Institute had done a study, I want to say in 2017, that showed that design-focused companies outperform the S&P 500 by over 200%. And you're going to say, okay, Robert, give me an example. And I will tell you Apple. Doesn't matter if you use Apple products. If you don't use Apple products, you likely wish you did, right? Because they're well designed. And they don't just put stuff together that are useful. They make it usable in ways that amalgamate, beautiful industrial design with good UI and UX design. I could go on about that forever. But I was fortunate to be able to support many product faculty doing a lot of cool work across industrial design, for sure, designing really cool products. Everything from clothing to furniture that is going to, provide support for, I think on the clothing side, LED lit clothing for people riding their bikes, or clothing for people with disabilities so they could get in and out of them better. Same with furniture. Lots of good stuff in the strategic foresight and innovation, lots of great stuff in the UI UX. By the way, OCADU does this thing called GradX every year, which is the graduate exhibition. So every single graduating student exhibits their product. They open the entire university for 4 days or so. Go there. It will as somebody who likes industrial design, Steve, you'll be in heaven.
I've been to GradX. Yeah, I back in the day, 2010, I think.
Oh, you gotta go back, Steve.
Yeah, okay.
Come back. Let me know. We'll go together. We'll go and go and do an industrial design infiltration. And
I would love that, Robert. The reason why I got so interested in it is because the mining sector, mining equipment, okay, something that people use for 12-hour shifts a day, has zero industrial design in it. And at the time, we were trying to see how we could cross-pollinate industrial designers into engineering teams so that you could have more Kubotas of the world and less other brands that don't do it as well, right?
Yeah, it's not that it doesn't have design, it just doesn't have good design.
That's right.
Like that, and that's a real difference between places. You mentioned Kubota. Japan thinks about the end user.
Absolutely.
Technology in general. Scandinavia, well known for that. You know, we in North America tend to think about what can the technology do and kind of glom the stuff on over top of that. That's changing. Apple's really changed the game.
Yeah.
You know, other companies like Adidas or Nike, right? Like they've infused design into apparel and sports wear in ways that, you know, make us want to wear them, but also make them functional at the same time. One thing I'll mention about OCADU, there's a Design for Health lab there run by a Canada Research Chair, Dr. Kate Sellen. And this spans industrial design, typographic design, product design, packaging design. They're designing products that can be used in healthcare. And one of the things that I remember was a portable naloxone kit. So to combat opioid addiction or overdoses, that looked at everything from the packaging to make it smaller and easier to carry around with you and strap to your wrist if you needed it, or your arm, whatever, to the typography, the font, to make it, you know, easily readable in an emergency if the person might not be, you know, super cognizant or compos mentis at the time, given you know, the context, to the design of the injector itself. Like they've thought through the entire thing and said, yeah, okay, this is an important life-saving thing, but we can actually apply design to this. And the thing that I really liked about that was something that I called the deliberate deployment of design, right? Which is not just to say this product is really good, you know, here's my smartphone with the keyboard, but to think about, okay, here's my smartphone that does stuff in an ecosystem that helps me actually get things done, like to deliberately think about design. And I'm very pleased that Canada in 2020 updated the Canada Research and Development classification to include the disciplines of design, including industrial design, because the rest of the world did that 40 years before us. And so we're catching up to the idea. And your point about mining is important. Like, I'm using that equipment for 12 hours a day. I'm wearing that clothing for 12 hours a day. We need to pay attention to the humans in the equation in order to most effectively increase the usability, but also the productivity.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. You know, Robert, I know that Steve could probably keep talking about industrial design all day, but we're not going to
Save me from myself.
I think when you guys go to GradX, that'll be another opportune time to kind of revive that. But we, you know, before we talk about eCampus Ontario, we did want to talk about the TAC network in Canada. Steve and I were at TAC Innovate 2024, the forum. I guess by the time this comes out, I don't want to date it, but we were there with you in Montreal in October. And, you know, we happened to be at the soiree that night when you received the award for your pioneering efforts, I think, in kind of bringing the TAC network together. And, you know, Steve and I had joked that, you know, you should be known as the godfather of the TAC network. So to embarrass you a little bit there, we just wanted to ask you about, you know, what was it that you saw, you know, in the model that works so well in Quebec, and why you felt it needed to really kind of be applied more broadly in Canada to kind of develop the network that we have now?
That's pretty flattering, and I was pretty shocked. It is very seldom that I'm rendered speechless, if not never. So it was, it was nice because it was about 10 years ago that I worked with a bunch of others to stand up what is now Tech Access Canada. So I was just fortunate to actually to take the principles of design and think about how can college research scale in a way that is going to be the most impactful thing it could. But I was joined by David Bertillon, Tracy Dyer, Uli Lagerquist, Micah Lukin, and Jamie Vandenbosch. Those were the group of people that worked together to support the establishment of Tech Access Canada, and like all of the TACs worked on that as well. So while I led the effort, it was by no means a solo effort. I think what I saw in the CCT model was the power of a collective approach. I also grew up in Saskatchewan, which basically meant that, if Steve's building a barn, I'm building a barn. So I like the idea of barn raising the innovation economy. But there's a couple of principles that apply here. One is that there should be no wrong door into the innovation ecosystem. And the second is that positive, consistent experiences matter. That latter one, by the way, I got from Bert Vandenberg, who was the godfather of the NSERC College Community Innovation Program. But the point of these principles is that when we work together provide businesses with more seamless supports, like the whole system benefits. So I might interact with the business that I can't support. They might want to do something that I can't do, or the timing doesn't work. But if I know that I can pass them on to you, then that's a positive experience for the business. And we have a more effective way of supporting businesses within an ecosystem approach there together. The CCTTs offer a cohesive model, and they operate like franchises. And when we were thinking through this, that was the model that I had actually, was we should be making a franchise of tech access centers, technology access centers. And like, you take this concept of a franchise, apply it to the TACs, and then we can support their evolution from their inception, because they started in, like, when was the first one done? 2012, I think, when we stood up the first one. I was part of the first cohort of TACs. So we, from that inception to what does it look like to evolve into a more like seamless approach? Because we had the idea that TACs are important, and how do we elevate them to a way, but most importantly, design that system from the outside in, not the inside out. Right. So if I'm in my college operating a TAC, I'm looking out at the world as a TAC, and I'm saying this is the way it is. But if I come outside of the fishbowl, and I see, okay, but there's a lot of TACs. What do they have in common? How, then we can take a more explicit and creative approach to designing them. And the CCTTs have done that, and so their model was really applicable to apply to the rest of Canada.
And I suppose, Robert, if you take that external looking in approach, it doesn't matter that the business community doesn't necessarily know the acronym TAC. It's just that they know that support's there, right?
Exactly. I think of TACs as a proprietary eponym, which basically is a fancy way to say, like, the name of something becomes the word. Google, Kleenex,
right.
Band-Aid, right? TAC, synonymous with innovation. That's where we're headed.
That's optimistic. I think, and Mike alluded to this before the last question. Draw a line for me, because it's not immediately clear. So from applied research and doing research at OCAD, like leading research there, to eCampus Ontario, maybe fill in that gap, and then I really want an opportunity for you to extol the what eCampus Ontario does and where you're going.
So I mentioned earlier, my undergraduate degree, I did 2 years in a college and 2 years in a university. And the university I went to transfer into in the third year was the University of Northern BC, which was brand new that year. So I was part of the first cohort of graduates the following year. But so it was been 94 to 96, and the internet was just taking off, and UNBC had a huge distance education mandate. So in my third year, I started designing hypertext teaching aids actually coding them and that kind of stuff. And that got me into basically using the internet in education. So I've always had an affinity, I guess, for using technology for teaching and learning. And that's, how I went in to do education and information science through the Knowledge Media Design Institute at University of Toronto eventually. So the experience of supporting digital learning was something I had a lot of experience with, right? So, from the early 90s through to the 2000s. And when the pandemic hit, obviously, it became even more important as we all pivoted to emergency remote learning. And the eCampus Ontario just happened to be looking for a CEO. Now, I wasn't looking for a job at the time, but when I got the call, it seemed interesting to me. And so, I went through the interview process to say, oh, that might be an interesting opportunity to do something kind of cool. So that's kind of how I came here to support eCampus Ontario. And it's been a great place to work. We have fantastic team members. I work for you. You're one of our members. So we have 53 members that we support. We have an excellent board, and we provide platforms and programs that help the sector really embrace the future of learning. But we try to think about that a little more broadly. It's not just technology-enabled learning. That's important. It's not just online learning. That's important. We talk about digital transformation. So if you want to use this thing called the internet in any aspect of conducting the business to go from 12th to the 21st century, then we're here to support you. And we provide 10 programs refracted through 6 degrees of digital transformation that supports learners, supports institutions, and support employers to come together to really ensure that the public post-secondary education system is doing the best job it can to produce, career-focused graduates that are also civically minded. The one thing I will say, though, given the context, is we do all of that, but we also help decrease costs and increase new revenue for our members. And that's really important in a time when we've got a financial crisis in the sector.
Mm-hmm. Obviously we know that with eCampus Ontario, like you would talk about that broader vision for a better future through digital higher education. But for us, in applied research, there's obviously a linkage there as well. And actually, to draw back to TAC Innovate, 2024, I was about to hike up Mount Royal like in the morning that I had some free time, and my president texted me and she's like, "Are we on the OSIP platform with eCampus Ontario?" And I said, "I'm in the process of doing that right now with Nancy." And then when I got back from Montreal, that was the first thing I did. I finished kind of putting together some of the documents that Nancy had provided me. So I think maybe to draw the line between eCampus Ontario and what we've been talking about with college applied research, can you maybe, and this will encourage maybe some of our listeners who aren't on the platform yet, but maybe just quickly talk about the linkage that eCampus provides with institutions like ours and with companies that are looking to do innovative projects.
Yeah, for sure. OSIP is the Ontario Collaborative Innovation Platform. It leverages AI to perform a matchmaking service for businesses or any employer. It could be a researcher in a university looking for somebody in a college to prototype their invention. But it basically it operates with a demand-driven innovation model, is specially focused on, TRL 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 around there. But it offers businesses, one way into all 53 members. And the capacity that is represented by all of the members. Importantly, of in the first 100 businesses that have gone through, 65% have accessed a college or a university outside of their geography. So somebody they couldn't know, and that's what it's really good at doing, is saying, like, I don't know what you can do at the Center for Smart Mining, and I might not even know I need you. But through the system, I can say, oh, here's the Center for Smart Mining. You should go and talk to them. And so what we are providing there is a way to de-risk and reduce the cost of new partner acquisition for colleges and universities and Indigenous institutes, while increasing the revenue from contract research and grants that you can gain through those engagements. In essence, we are taking the TAC model of demand-driven innovation and applying it across the entire sector. And colleges are a big part of this, right? Because the primary focus is on TRL 4+.
Mhm.
So this is the innovation valley of death, and colleges are so well positioned to perform that role. So in essence, we're taking the college applied research model and we're scaling it across the entire sector so that anybody can provide the expertise at any point in the value chain of, or the continuum of research, from idea to invoice.
I like idea to invoice. Might steal that. Um, so we're kind of, as we sort of wind down, Robert, this has been a bit of a, you talked about barn raising. This has been a bit of a barnstorming of your career so far.
That was good, Steve. Wow.
I've never used barnstorming in a sentence before, so hopefully using it correctly.
Yeah.
But if you would just get out your crystal ball for a moment, obviously you've been plugged into the research ecosystem in colleges and universities, beyond. You alluded to a bit of prognostication as it relates to financial hardship coming in the sector. Um, you don't have to give us a rosy picture, but if you want to just have a forward-looking statement about where we're going and what you think of that, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, we are in unprecedented times. We have a kind of a dual crisis of both a financial and an existential crisis, right? What is the value of public education? Is it a public good or a private good? I believe it's a public good, but I think the majority of the public thinks of it as a private good. And it's important for us, I think, to understand as publicly assisted colleges and universities and Indigenous Institute that we are providing important public goods. I think the immediate future is going to be a challenge for sure, but it is also an opportunity that is going to enable us to work more cohesively on supporting the goals of public education. I think we will see greater cohesion and cooperation among all of the actors. I think that we will see, on education in particular, we'll see more ability to work as a system, like in pretty much every other jurisdiction in the world. I mentioned that I went to school in British Columbia, 2 years in a college, 2 years in a university. That was the air we breathed. There was no question that any credit I took at college was going to transfer to any of the universities in the sector. We don't have that here yet. We may not get that in my lifetime or my career, but I think we'll move towards that with better cohesion. Certainly on the back office stuff, there's no reason why we can't do more work that way for incremental cost savings. I think the research front, though, is the most opportune or most ripe for creative opportunity. And because we have an unprecedented and unparalleled time of working together between colleges and universities, a certain percentage of the companies that we support on OSIP go to both a college and a university to get complementary skills. In 2007, when I started at George Brown College to start their research office, college research was not looked on favorably. It was seen as a threat by incumbent actors, primarily because there's not much money to go around. And so any money going to the colleges was less going to anybody else. But it's almost 20 years later now, and we understand that colleges are providing a complementary level of expertise and capacity that is not otherwise provided. And when we work together, we can see that we can achieve better outcomes for both intellectual property that is developed in our world-leading basic universities, but also the IP that is being developed and exploited in our companies. And I see that is going to increase. I think the simple fact of the matter is that you're doing the great work that you're doing in an ecosystem with other actors. Other colleges and the technology access centers are doing this at a way that is at a high level of professionalism, right? That's the point of doing a franchise for Tech Access Canada. It's a high level of professionalism that when businesses come in, they expect a level of service. You've set the bar for how that kind of professionalism can happen. And I think we've opened the door for everybody to participate equally. And to me, that's the most significant opportunity that we have in front of us right now.
That's great. I think that's a great forward-looking statement for us. And I think a lot of our colleagues would echo those sentiments. And you've been so generous with your time, and we know we've got to let you get to your next meeting. But before we go, we always like to ask our guests, you're very busy, but in your spare time, what does Robert Luke like to do when he's not thinking about, the innovation ecosystem?
My spouse and I like to walk in the woods. We like to get outside as much as possible. Um, I'm of a certain age, so I like birds. We like to look at birds, see what they're doing, get the binoculars out. I use the Merlin app to tell me what's around. So we do a lot of that just to get outside. Spending as much time outdoors is important when a lot of our life is mediated by screens. And this is great, by the way. We get to connect. Right? This is now normal. This is the normal way of working. Whereas, in 2020, not so much. It was still an anomaly. And I value that highly, the ability to connect with, great people and experts like you over time and distance is excellent. But I also value the time I get away from the screen and other than the Merlin app on this screen, but to take a look outside and just be able to look far away. Right, that's what I like about being outside is you're able to get distance. And one thing I do miss, I grew up in Saskatchewan and I love that open space. First time my wife visited there, she said it gave her horizontigo. Right, you can see for a long way, and to me that's grounding, but also it helps to put perspective on any small contribution that I'm making in any part of life, but just what my responsibility is as a person in the world.
Makes me want to go outside, that's for sure. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. It was I'm glad that we took the tangents that we did and then got to hear what you had to say about a variety of topics. I'm sure that our listeners will appreciate it, but really thank you for your time and joining us today.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Yeah, no, thanks again. Appreciate it.
The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Commito and Steve Gravel, presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.